this is going to be an absolute flop. I don't know whether it deserves 99%. I think that's incredibly high. Your opinion is so polluted, I suppose. In January, the beginning of this year, I started a film course, and one of the first courses that I did in it was the acting course, my main passion with filmmaking. Within that course, the instructor, Bruce Marciano, recommended as an exercise to watch old movies to study the evolution of how acting has changed over the years. A lot of other filmmakers in lots of different departments have said to watch old movies to see how different genres have adapted. What better way to study film than to watch films, which is something that I enjoy immensely. So I've had a blast watching these over the last couple of months, and I started them with the rest of my family. We watched To Kill a Mockingbird and Casablanca together, but I guess the spark for these long old movies isn't quite everybody's thing, so I started watching them by myself. So I thought it would be fun to share what old movies I had seen and my thoughts on them. The world of old movies is so vast and so broad, and there are literally thousands. It can feel quite overwhelming to know where to start and what movies to watch and which ones are considered good old movies and bad old movies. So I thought I would take you through the ones that I have seen and sort of where I'd started with them, if I think they're worth watching or whether they were bad, whether they were good. I think some people grow up watching more old films than others. I think that's just sort of like a family thing. I don't feel that I watched a lot of old movies growing up, but when I sort of went to think back on what old movies I had seen, there was more than I thought there was. So I would just grab that list. 1 second.
A few moments later.
Did I actually bring it with me? Hold on. Okay, never mind then. I'll have to run them off the top of my head. I guess it's mainly old musicals, I'd say, is old films that I saw more. So things like Singing in the Rain, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, The Sound of Music, The King and I. I've seen that once. I remember really liking it, and then everyone else was like, what? We saw a bunch of other old films like Pollyanna, a couple of shows like Robinson Crusoe. Oh, there's so many that's gonna bug me now. To start off the old movies, we started with To Kill a Mockingbird. I'll just run off a couple of stats about the movies. I have a giant bunch of sticky notes full of different points to talk about. Came out, if you live in the UK, 1963, but it came out in December of 1962 for America. It's 2 hours and 9 minutes, so it's on the longer side of films. Personally, I don't mind long films. I quite enjoy long films. I think there are some short films that feel like an absolute drag and some long films that don't feel long enough. So I think it really depends on the amount of story that's being conveyed, the pacing of that is. But I think a good long movie, there's nothing wrong with it. If I'm going to sit down to watch a movie, I might as well enjoy it for a good chunk of time. This one is in black and white and it is rated PG. I think PG might be a little bit low for some of the topics that are discussed, especially within the courtroom setting. The parental guidance is definitely a strong part on that. If younger viewers are watching it, it might be disturbing, I guess, especially if they aren't aware at all of the topic that's being discussed. There's that point to consider. On Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb, on Rotten Tomatoes it scored 93%, which I think is actually pretty fair. It was a good movie. And on IMDb it's an 8.3. It stars Gregory Peck, Mary Badham, which is such an unfortunate last name, and Philip Alford, directed by Robert Mulligan, and the author of the book that the film was adapted from, she actually really loved the script and she loved the direction that they had taken the film. She loved the casting choice of the children, even though they weren't professionals at the time. This is one of their first projects. Specifically, she loved Gregory Peck's wardrobe for the film, which I think is a nice little detail. I guess as an author, you put so much time into thinking about these characters and envisioning them. To have details such as wardrobe served and portrayed in the way that you wanted, I think is a nice thing. And it won several awards. It won Best Actor, Best Adapted Screenplay. So my personal thoughts on this movie, having not read the book beforehand, I have got the book now and I'd like to read it. I know I had a knowledge of this movie, To Kill a Mockingbird. I knew it was a very renowned, iconic film. I had no idea what the story was going into it, so when we sat down to watch it, that was pretty much the first that I was aware of what the story was. To have a story with such really deep and almost disturbing and dark themes, having it portrayed through the eyes of a child, I think is such a profound way of dealing with topics like that. Because I guess people often forget that when those things are happening in society or in other people, grown-ups' personal lives, the children that are around you, they do see, they do hear, and they are curious and they really want to know and they are going to investigate and they want to find out what's happening. I really liked Scout and Jim, the two of them together. I thought that was really nice too. I thought the acting of those two was really, really sweet and incredible because it's such a long movie. It would have been difficult for them those days in and those days out, going from different places. They brought such a life to a character, which I think a lot of children actors, when given the space to do that, they really do come alive. So I guess as you watch films now that are coming out and ones that have come out within the last 20 years, you become very familiar with the actors that are in them and different roles that they have played, and you sort of flit and float between different movies, and maybe you have a favorite actor or actress. So because I'm not familiar with all of the older films, I didn't know specific actors from specific films. So with Gregory Peck, I later saw another film that he was in. It didn't twig until I was writing down the details for all of these films that it was the same actor. It's about 20 years between the one that I saw him in second when he was a lot younger to the one in To Kill a Mockingbird. So I didn't recognize that it was him. It's actually been really cool now looking at different old films and seeing different actors in them and then recognizing them. It's actually quite cool to see not just their acting style in one film but in multiple films, sort of accidentally, which is really fun. There's a couple of facts about the film that I've written down and some fun facts for it as well. So the budget was $2 million and it made $13,129,846. So I guess it did very well. The DP was Russell Harlan, and the genre is family thriller, but I didn't really see the thriller aspect. I guess sort of with the neighbor, it was, I guess you could call it a thriller, but I would put it more as a family court drama because that's really what the main focus was. Or at least that's what I took from it anyway. So if you watch it, you'll have to let me know whether you think thriller fit the film. Yes, okay. So the summary speech in the end of the court, Gregory Peck did that whole thing. I think the speech is about 6 minutes long. He did the whole thing in one take, first try. They were happy with it and they just went with that one, which is really impressive. With a speech like that, you really want to get it first try because you don't want to spend 2 hours going over a 6-minute speech, doing different takes each time and trying to remember what you want to say different on the 6th line compared to the 3rd line. And also, if you watch about 30 minutes into the film, there's a scene where Jim and Scout are talking, and I think it's specifically when they're debating whether to go get his trousers that they accidentally left on the fence. You can see Scout miming Jim's lines for him, which is quite funny. So now my personal thoughts on the film. I would give it an 8 to 9 out of 10. I think it was an actually really nice film. I think it was sweet in ways, but also really serious in ways. And I love it when films get the balance of the two because that's what life is like. It's hard, but it's also beautiful at the same time. This film, it talks about the topic of racism and segregation and bias, a lot of hate and fear of people that are different and that you don't know. I think it was a really lovely film. I really enjoyed it, and I hope if you choose to watch it as well that you enjoy it too, because I think the way it was made was perfectly fine. I think for an era as well where colour was a lot more common in the 60s, early 60s, they still made the film in black and white. I'll actually have to research if that was a choice or whether it's something that they just had to work around. It really made a statement. So the next film is the last film that we got through altogether. We saw Casablanca, which, now, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this wrong or whether other people are pronouncing this wrong. Is it Casablanca or Casablanca? I'm probably going to end up mixing the two as I talk about this, so bear with me. This film came out in 1942 if you're American, or 1943 if you're British. I don't know why there is a delay in films coming out from America to here. It's quite frustrating, actually. And this film is rated U. Now, for a film set in a war period, it's incredibly rare. To find a film that is set in a war scenario that is rated U. And it's also very rare to find a romance movie that is a U. And then you combine war and romance together and still get it rated a U. That's pretty impressive right there. If you can have a good movie, I don't know why it should be impressive actually. I think that should be just standard, because it proves you don't need everything that people are stuffing these movies with nowadays. You can have a good movie stand alone by itself without having any unnecessary content, war-wise or romance-wise. This movie is 1 hour and 42, so it's not a really long movie, but it's not exactly a short movie. Again, I knew nothing about this movie going into it. I was aware of the actress. I've actually been studying her life recently. It's incredibly fascinating. I think Ingrid Bergman was such an amazing woman and an amazing actress, and studying her life and her filmography has been really inspiring. This movie, it got an 8.5 on IMDb and it got 99% on Rotten Tomatoes. I think compared to some of the other films, I don't know whether it deserves 99%. I think that's incredibly high. I guess there's nothing necessarily wrong with the movie. It wasn't at all what I was expecting. I knew it was this sort of romance film, but it completely took me by surprise. I guess in a positive way. I'm not entirely sure. It's really difficult to give an accurate summary of these movies when your expectations are so vastly different to the thing that you end up watching. It's hard to give an accurate response to them when your opinion is so polluted, I suppose. Anyway, this movie is in black and white. It stars Humphrey Bogart, Ingrid Bergman, and Paul Henreid. It's directed by Michael Krutitz. I probably butchered that name. It was actually adapted by a play, I believe. The awards that it won Best Director, Best Picture, Best Writing, and the DP was Arthur Edison. Now, this movie had a budget of $1 million, and it made about $3 to $6 million, which is a very good turnover, especially when they had the script for this film. They did not know what direction they were taking this at all. They actually filmed 2 alternate endings because they couldn't decide whether she was going to stay with Humphrey Bogart's character or the person who plays technically her husband. I think that was actually a really nice love triangle, actually, with the way that they chose to end it, where she continues to go with her husband. And I thought the way that they chose to play her husband was really nice, and to have someone understanding of the situation that they both found themselves in was really nice to see. So when they were making this movie, in the book that I've been reading about Ingrid Bergman, she mentioned that no one knew what on earth they were doing with this movie. They had no idea how this was going to turn out. The studio was panicking. They thought this was going to be an absolute flop. They really didn't know what this film was going to turn out like. Everyone was super stressed filming this. They were adjusting the script as they were going. So when they came to shoot the final scene, which has become so iconic now, and the final lines that are said, they decided to shoot the one where she leaves on the plane first. They shot it all, they finished the last lines, and they called cut, and they were like, that's it. We're not even going to film the other one. We're deciding we're going with this one. I much prefer the ending that way. I can't imagine the ending different. Some fun facts for you about the filming of this. Ingrid Bergman is very tall. I think she's 5'9", 5'10", I think. So for a female, 5'10" is quite tall. I'm 5'2". For a female, that's quite tall. I think my dad is 5'2", or my dad is 5'10" or 5'11", so he's like the same height as my dad. So when she was filming Casablanca, there was sort of like an unspoken rule, but definitely a rule, that the female star couldn't be taller than the male star. They wanted the guy to sort of tower and the female to sort of be lower to get the style shots that they wanted. So in order to achieve that, when Ingrid Bergman and Humphrey Bogart were filming together so that he could be taller than her, he had this whole standing rig that they had built so that he could walk and she could walk next to each other, or standing, so that he would be taller than her, which she found quite hilarious, actually. I think most films that she did something like that, or when she was on stage, to get the distance, they'd just be very far apart from each other, or she'd be leaning on something, or he'd be resting up against something to make them look taller. Anyway, I'm getting carried away. So this film, the genre is romance and war, which I think is that's fine. I give this film an 8 to a 9 out of 10. It wasn't what I expected. I think it was better than I expected, but I had no idea what to expect at the same time. I think her acting was really lovely. She has this aura and this charm about her. Even though the film, I guess, is really set around Humphrey Bogart's character, she really steals the scene. There's so many iconic lines from this film that you hear in other films people quoting. I never knew that it was from this film. I really enjoyed watching, since I had this awareness of her career at the time. It was really fun to sort of watch and dissect why people thought the way they did about her and why she stole the scene in every single film that she did. As a movie, I think it's a pretty good movie. I don't know how often I would watch it, if I'd watch it again. I think if I was going to show someone else, I'd watch it again. I think it's a good movie.